to real world networks. I think, I personally, for what it's worth, want to encourage sort of comparative studies with different networks. But okay, next slide, please. So site scorecards, data quality reports for sites, and I think this is one of the N3C secret sauce to actually make sure that the data, makes some sort of was high quality. So let's see who's going to be
I'll be
Maya
presenting.
or Sofia. Great.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Looking forward to it.
Let me just quickly make sure I share the right screen again. Okay, do you guys see a scorecard overview?
Yeah.
Awesome. Just move this out. Okay. So, hello everybody. My name is Sofia Dard, and I am a member of the Data Ingestion and Harmonization team at N3C. I'm also a data analyst at UNC working on Emily's team.
And hi everyone, I'm Maya. I'm with Palantir, where I work with also the Data Ingestion and Harmonization team on data pipelines and quality, and on a variety of other N3C projects.
And we'll be giving an overview of the N3C Scorecard project. If I can change the next slide. There we go. Okay. So during this meeting, we'll explain what the goals are for phase 1 of this project while briefly covering the workflow and methods. We'll also get a chance to do a deeper dive on some of the scorecard metrics and see what's in store for phase 2 of the scorecards. And we'll have enough time at the end to answer any questions and hopefully have a discussion about this project. I did want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication that everyone on this slide put in over the last year for the scorecards. Our team comprised of Palantir members of the DNI and DI&H team, students, and of course our beta testers who provided excellent feedback on the pilot scorecards. So thank you to all of them for making this possible. Get off to Maya.
Great. So hi everyone. As I mentioned previously, I work with the Palantir team. And so specifically, I work on the weekly N3C data releases that you have all grown accustomed to. I also work closely with the Data Ingestion and Harmonization team, or DI&H, to ensure that the quality of those weekly releases is up to par and good for researchers to conduct analysis on. So before we actually dive deep into scorecards, I wanted to provide a quick overview of the current N3C workflow and explain how these scorecards are going to fit in going forward. So currently, sites submit zipped payloads of their EHR data in one of 5 CDM formats via SFTP to us. Those zip payloads then go through an ingestion and harmonization pipeline where their data is mapped to OMOP, and a variety of data quality checks are run to ensure that this data is ready to be released. If all of those checks are met, then the data actually makes it into that week's release. But specifically, let's actually focus in deeper into these data quality checks. So Sophia, next slide, please. So currently, the pipeline, as I mentioned, detects issues with sites' data. So you can see some examples on the screen. For example, missing tables, a required field in the data might be empty, or we might detect issues with primary keys where there are duplicate records or missing primary keys. After those issues are detected, members of the DI&H team actually reach out to the site to fix the issues that we're seeing on our end. So eventually, the site will submit a payload that can pass all of the necessary checks, and it can be released to N3C researchers. So currently, these checks are detected in our pipeline, and then we have to reach out to the site for fixing. But the idea here was, what if we could actually send a site a report to give them greater visibility into their data? This way, sites could preemptively see and address the issues that we have to currently reach out to them for. Additionally, this way, sites can actually take even greater action to ensure that the data that we're giving researchers downstream is really usable and not just address the critical checks that we're detecting in the pipeline right now. And overall, this actually helps sites with not only the quality of their COVID data, but also just the quality of all of their EHR data. So this is where scorecards come in. Next slide, please. So the DI&H team worked to create two key scorecards, something we called a site-specific scorecard and a site comparison scorecard. The site-specific scorecard contains a variety of visualizations on the latest payload that a site has submitted to us. The site comparison scorecard provides visualizations of how a site's metrics compare with other sites in its CDM, so it gives it useful context on kind of how to gauge the metrics that they're seeing. So these scorecards were created by first transforming the N3C payload data that we've received into new data sets using code repositories. Then those data sets were brought into Contour and visualizations were made to display a certain data quality metric. And then lastly, we took those visualizations and copied all of them into a Notepad document to create one cohesive kind of document for all of that. In developing these scorecards, as Sofia alluded to earlier, we also had many review sessions with the DI&H team. We had a soft launch to 8 beta test sites this past December, and all of those review sessions and beta testers provided critical feedback that we've incorporated into the production version that you'll see today. One other thing to point out about these scorecards is that while there was a lot of upfront work and testing that was done to create these documents, this amount of workload is not going to be required going forward for every single new site or for every single time that we want to send out a new scorecard. So that actually leads me to the second part of methods, which is templating. Next slide, please. So the way that we created these Contour and Notepad visualizations was by creating templates. So as you can see on the left-hand side here, even though every single visualization is specific to a site, that site ID was coded as a variable, so it could be really easily altered. So from there, we take a visualization for one site, and we can actually deploy it, as you see in this middle column here, to all 77 sites. So we can create a site 10 visualization and a site 106 visualization very easily. This notepad also updates regularly, so these visualizations don't have to be recreated every single time that a site has new data. And then the last step here is that every 2 weeks, we can send these scorecards to every site's SFTP folder. So we convert the latest visualization document to a PDF, and we send these to a site's outgoing folder in the same location that they send us, they submit data to N3C. So I like to think of this as sites submit data to us regularly, and every 2 weeks, we give them back a report on the quality of the data they're submitting. So actually, the next set of scorecards will come out this Friday. So hopefully that was a useful overview of the current N3C process and how these scorecards were created to further enhance the data that researchers have access to through N3C. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sofia to speak more about the goals of this project and the specific visualizations that sites can see.
Thanks, Maya. Okay, so I'd like to quickly share what our goals are for these scorecards. Through these scorecards, we hope to inform our sites about the data quality of their payloads by highlighting metrics that they are successfully passing, as well as pointing out areas for targeted improvement. We want to maintain data quality across subsequent payloads and stop any regression on these metrics. We're also in a unique position to help with troubleshooting and can provide solutions for hopefully some of those data quality issues, which we hope is a real value add for participating sites. Perhaps another equally compelling goal is that the scorecards will provide sites with a unique perspective that is currently not offered by really any other dashboard or organization. The other 76 sites or sites that are grouped by CDM now make up a benchmark that your site's metrics can now be compared against. We hope contributing sites realize that these free scorecards can provide another advantage by helping them improve their data quality, not just in their N3C payloads, but also locally at their CDMs. And we hope this incentivizes sites to submit payloads more frequently in order to get refreshed scorecards every 2 weeks. So we are finally at the overview. We had 2 sites kindly volunteer to share their site comparison scorecards anonymously. So that's who Scorecards will be looking at. For site identifying reasons, I can't actually share the site-specific scorecard, but we'll touch on one metric from that scorecard as well. And for the sake of time, I've picked out just a few relevant and impactful sections of the scorecards to present today. So we are not going over all the full scorecards. So the scorecards needed to go a step further than the data quality checks embedded in the ingestion and harmonization pipeline. These checks had to measure the usability of the data for clinical and research questions. As such, the scorecards focus on metrics regarding demographics, COVID-19, visits and encounters, measurements or labs, extreme dates, non-standard concepts, as well as recovers data enhancements. So as you can see, there are 2 types of scorecards for now: a site-specific scorecard, which is displayed in the middle. That is flanked by the second type of scorecard called a site comparison scorecard. The screenshots that you see are actually the first page of the scorecards themselves. The site-specific scorecard is currently around 17 pages, and it's meant to inform the site of their individual metrics. The site comparison scorecards, which are roughly around up to 30 pages for now, they stack your site against the other anonymized sites. So in the site comparison scorecards, I do want to emphasize that all of the data partner IDs have been obfuscated and your site's ID has been changed to the string your site. Additionally, any visualizations with any non-zero cell with a value less than 20 has been replaced with 20. So you might also have noticed that the site comparison scorecards on both sides are slightly different. For a few reasons, we had to group all 77 sites into 2 groups: an OMOP group, which includes the PedsNet sites, and a non-OMOP group, which includes the PecorNet, Trinetics, and ACT sites. For some of these metrics, we wanted to show the individual sites in the comparison group, but having 77 values on an axis actually prevented the visualizations from being effective and digestible. Another reason was that some of the metrics, like the non-standard concepts, only applies to OMOP sites, since the ingestion and harmonization pipeline does the mapping transformation for the non-OMOP sites. So we had to split the site comparison into 2 flavors of scorecards. Moving on, the first check that I'm going to share is the ethnicity breakdown. And yes, some of the labels might be difficult to read on screen, but you'll be able to see them pretty clearly in the PDF version of the scorecard that your site would have received. On the left is the OMOP site comparison scorecard, and on the right is the non-OMOP site comparison scorecard. That format will stay the same for the next few slides. Informative checks like these are a good gut check that what your site thinks they're sending is indeed what we are receiving. Your site is pointed to as the last row. Additionally, you can see how your site compares with your peers in terms of mapping and percent missingness or any flavor of null. You can also start to see here why we decided to split apart the site comparison scorecards, because OMOP allows sites to map their source values to more granular concepts than the non-OMOP sites with their carefully regulated CDM value sets. It's even more apparent in the race visualization, but I'm not showing that one here today. But you can definitely see it in the PDF. So the next focus area is the COVID-19 metrics. Remember that OMOP is on the left and non-OMOP is on the right. For the COVID-19 focus area, I've selected the COVID-19 test results visualization to explain. This metric was best displayed as your site in a column compared to all of the other sites in that group, in that column, which contains the mean percentages of the other CDM sites for that result on each row. We wanted to show how sites were coding or mapping their COVID-19 test results in the hopes that it might help your site improve your mappings if need be. We also wanted to help sites ascertain that their site's distribution fully covers the distribution of results being recorded, and that it was close to the mean percentages for their CDM group, meaning your site should have a significant amount of negative test results, a decent amount of positive test results, and a much smaller third category of inconclusive or invalid test results. If you see that your site's positive test result percent is 100%, but the mean is hovering around 12%, then you know you have an issue on your hands that you can investigate. For troubleshooting purposes, we've tried to make it easier by providing a table linked in the description that stores the OMOP concept ID equivalents for these test result concepts. So the non-OMOP sites can definitely use that link to see what those OMOP concepts that you see on the screen map to in terms of LOIN codes. The other tool that you can also use is Athena, where you can look up the test result concept ID to see what that LOIN code is associated with. In the visits focus area, I've selected the inpatient length of stay visual to review. This metric was best displayed as your site being the blue line compared to the other site's median inpatient length of stay. For an average site, the length of stay distribution should have a peak around 2 to 3 days with a steep drop off for higher length of stays. In fact, the volunteer site on the left has a model or ideal blue line, so kudos to them. Moving on to the non-OMOP visual to the right. Ideally, your site does not have any visits with a negative length of stay, nor does it have an excessive number of visits with an extremely long length of stay, both of which I've circled in red. On top of that, both axes are on a log scale. So when you see 10,000 days on the x-axis, know that that means 27 years in the hospital. All of the data points after that are multiplied by a factor of 10, becoming even more biologically implausible. So the volunteer site on the right could take a look at their negative length of stays and try to investigate why that's happening. Otherwise, both sites can pat themselves on the back for not having super long length of stays, super long length of inpatient stays. Okay, so for the measurements focus area, I'm pretty excited to share this unit inference and harmonization metric, which is actually another pipeline that's kind of embedded downstream from the ingestion and harmonization pipeline that rescues less than optimal measurement units. And it's the perfect example of how, by participating in N3C, sites can get another value add by seeing how their units are optimized in the enclave. On the left is the site-specific version, while the tile on the right is the OMOP site comparison scorecard, which is actually displaying the approximate median percentage across all of the OMOP and the PeaceNet sites. I want to point out that this unit inference and harmonization pipeline is actually looking at 53 measured concept categories of quantitative labs and vitals like blood pressure, height, weight, creatinine, and white blood cell counts, just to name a few. The first number in the tile is the percentage of records that had null units. The second number is the percent of records with invalid units. The third number is the percentage of records with unharmonizable units. The ideal percentage is 0% for the first three percentages, but greater than 10% null, invalid, or unharmonizable is when it starts to become concerning, which is when the conditional formatting will actually change to red. Less than or equal to 10% is okay, and it will stay blue. The fourth number in the tile is the percentages of null and invalid units that could be inferred from the unit pipeline. The ideal here would be NA, or like a line that goes through it, meaning your site did not have any null or invalid units to begin with. But the other ideal number here would be 100% inferred. But if it is greater than 90%, then it's still okay and it will stay blue. If it's less than or equal to 90% inferred, then the conditional formatting will change to red again. And lastly here, that fifth number is the percent of records that was harmonizable, and it's a reflection of how usable your units are for those 53 measured concepts. Again, ideally, this number is as close to 100%, but if it's greater than 90%, it's okay and it will stay blue. Lastly, a huge shout out to Kate Bradwell, who is the architect of this pipeline, and she has even provided a link to a UHI tool that sites can use locally to help improve units in their source data. And she's even volunteered to help individual sites with adapting this code locally. So you can definitely reach out to her. The next focus area is extreme dates, which looks at dates in the distant past or in the future. I selected the future dates visualization to go over, and future here is defined as further in the future than your payload's run date when adjusted for time or date shifting. And this metric is looking at extreme future dates in each of the OMOP columns. Your site is still pointed to as the last row. The reason why this check was created is, for example, no site should be submitting future dates in the death date column, as no one has been able to predict death yet. So we found it kind of necessary to make this visualization so we could measure the parts when the data becomes biologically implausible. So that future dates in the death date column, that would be an easy data quality issue for sites to investigate. At the same time, sites will also be able to see what the range of extreme future dates are at the other sites and see where their site stacks up in comparison. Another focus area was the recovered data enhancements that a subset of sites participated in. We have metrics for long COVID clinic visits, ADT transactions, no NOP, SDOH measures, and the O2 devices, which is the one that I selected to display here. In this visualization, your site is actually the last column. And basically, it's just showing the distribution of the different types of O2 devices. You can definitely read more of the description to find out more about it, and the other data enhancements that I mentioned are in the scorecard. And the last focus area is the non-standard concepts, which only the OMOP group will have in their scorecards. The heat grid on the right is looking at the percentage of no matching concepts in the key OMOP domains, and ideally the numbers are as close to 0% as possible. From a formatting perspective, I also wanted to point out that each of the visualizations is accompanied by a helpful description, definition, and any links to external resources as necessary. Of course, once you all have had a chance to review the scorecards, and if you think any of the text could be explained further, please let us know. Some of you might be wondering, so where and how can I access my site scorecards? Please, your first step would be to contact your site's ETL analyst who submits the N3C payload. They would have the site credentials to actually access the SFTP server. Ask them to pull the scorecards from the N3C SFTP outgoing folder with the most recent date and share with whomever is appropriate. We deploy the first iteration of the scorecards on March 3rd, and the first refresh scorecards went out on March 17th. So that's what you see the dated folders for. The most recent one will be the one with the most recent date. Now you can check biweekly for the next round of scorecards. Please make sure that you review them, that you read the descriptive text, and investigate any of the data quality issues that are pointed out in the scorecards. But you can also feel free to ask questions or for help. My contact info is actually listed on the last slide, same with Emily's, and we can definitely give you Maya's as well. So you can definitely ask any one of us any questions that you have in terms of accessing the scorecards or just anything that you find within the scorecard. We've already had quite a few sites reach out. Many of the sites had either not accessed their SFTP in a while, or people had changed, so the credentials went with that person. So we've been able to help, I think, a few sites reestablish their credentials so that they could access their scorecards. Currently, we are still in phase 1 of the scorecard project, but we're almost done. We hope to hear back from many of the sites after you've all had a chance to review the scorecards. Any actionable feedback will be addressed iteratively for the site-specific and the site comparison scorecards. There is actually a third type of scorecard called the PI scorecard, which is drafted, and I'll actually give you a sneak peek on the next slide. And then also coming down the pipeline is a potential fourth and hopefully last type of scorecard temporarily. It's called the removal reason scorecard, but that's still very much in the early phases. So phase 2 will start at some point in the next few weeks. I'm hoping that version 2 of the scorecard types will expand the focus areas and the checks that we currently have. For example, phase 2 will hopefully have metrics for immunizations, medications, and maybe another mortality related metric. But the list is still to be determined. And if any of the sites have any thoughts or opinions about what they would like to see, they are more than welcome to share their ideas with us. So I promised a little preview of the PI scorecard, and here it is. The redacted areas are where there were some site identifying information, so we had to hide that. But this scorecard will be 2 to 3 pages, and it's meant for PIs to quickly ascertain the data quality status of their site and how they rank compared to the sites in their CDM group, as well as compared to all of the sites in the enclave. There's a lot more checks to be added than the ones that you can see on the screen right now, but those will be ready in the upcoming few weeks. Now, it's called the PI scorecard, but that doesn't stop the analysts at the site from looking at this as well. So when these end up being deployed, feel free to also look at this scorecard. And yeah, I think that's the end of the presentation, and we can get to questions now.
Cool. So
I see a
Warren,
comment in the chat. Thank you.
okay, so chat. Well, let's start out with the Q&A. So Warren, because I found the scorecard incredibly helpful. It really helped us go through our data. So kudos from Warren. Then is there another comment? So so that's very cool that you got the unit harmonization thing up and running and deployed, because that's pretty complicated. And maybe can you talk a little bit about some of the issues? Did you run into issues with sort of automating that and using that to populate scorecards that went beyond the other parts of the project?
Yes, and I think Maya and I can both talk about this one. Maya, do you want to talk about just the logistical technical issue that we had at first?
Yeah, absolutely. So Joel, you nailed it. This visualization looks pretty simple, but there are a lot of underlying transformations that have to be done to the data to get to these numbers. And so currently the scorecards are designed to render within 60 seconds. So all of the visualization should be complete in 60 seconds. And these take much, much longer than 60 seconds to kind of complete. So we actually moved a lot of this to another tool called Pipeline Builder, and basically reworked how this analysis was being done so that we could get the number below 60 seconds. Because yeah, this was one of the trickiest ones that we, especially right towards the end, were working on.
Yeah, and the reason for it being sort of computationally intensive was because it's hitting the measurement table, and the measurement table has over 1 billion rows. So at first it was taking 30 minutes, 45 minutes, sometimes up to an hour to render, if it even rendered. And so at that point, we realized we had to switch gears and use a different tool, and Kate and Maya got that done in the nick of, literally just in time for the release. And then after that, the site comparison scorecard visualizations were not too bad.
That's great. So talk to us about the site-specific versions of this. What's involved in deploying the unit harmonization pipeline at individual sites?
So it will look pretty much, let me go back to that slide. So the tile that you see on the left is actually from the site-specific scorecard. So the individual site, that's what it's going to look like for them. the volunteer site is, that's their numbers, and they can take a look at this and see that the percent of null units is turned red because it's over 10% null, and they can investigate whether or not they can try to look locally and see if they can figure out why so many of their measurements are indeed missing a unit. The other option that they have is that they can actually contact Kate or actually click on the UHI tool. It goes to a Git link, I think, that they can read up on the way that this tool is built and see if they can implement it locally. Sometimes sites don't know that it's happening, and it's something that they can just quickly fix. Otherwise, once they start investigating, sometimes they do discover actual ETL issues. But we're hoping that this will at least highlight the issue and that they can then try to figure out what their next steps will be. Obviously, once this data gets into the enclave, that 28.99% gets inferred and rescued by the pipeline. So their data looks a lot better in N3C, but we are hoping that they can also make some local changes. And then I think you had another question just about how it looks, how the site-specific scorecard looks in general. And basically, it will look like the site comparison visualizations that you saw, but it will just have one individual site in the actual metric. So if I go back to the table of contents, you see the site-specific scorecard is in the middle. Most of the metrics are kept the same between the site-specific and the site comparison. The only difference is you will see one row or one column that displays just your site's data in the site-specific scorecard versus in the site comparison scorecards where you were stacked up against either the other 29 OMOP sites or the other 46 non-OMOP sites.
Great. Okay, that's very cool. And any let's see, I see there are a couple of other questions, Q&A. No, I guess not. Okay, so I've been instructed to remind people that we are transitioning to a new Zoom service. I actually thought we were transitioning this time, but it's next time. So there will be email coming out this week, so people should look for that.
Joel, I can share my screen really fast.
Go
and
ahead.
show
Yeah,
the details.
please do it.
Let's see.
Let me stop sharing. I can give you back the screen.
Okay, thank you. So here you go. Did you want to mention that, Joel?
Okay, so we're transitioning to a new Zoom service. Email will be sent out. Register, so there's a bit.ly link, but I assume this will be part of the email. So,
Yes.
so you'll be receiving instructions, and look forward to seeing people soon. And thanks for a very interesting presentation. These are really, I think, extremely useful tools, which I think will be used in a lot of other contexts. I mean, we worked with the team, mostly Richard Moffat, who developed this. So we'd had a general intent to deploy it locally, but hadn't realized you were getting it into such nice shape. So it sounds like it will be actually quite useful, since the issue, the big picture being, a lot of people are sort of focused on mapping names, but what's actually in the data is also important. So the unit harmonization is really key. Should also say, in the off chance there are any pathologists in the group, which there may or may not be, the pathology CAP, basically the whole process of validating lab data across different institutions has a lot in common with this, because you're sort of doing statistical analysis to do a sort of sanity check. And I think it'd be interesting actually to explore the relationship between these two things. But okay, well, thanks, and thanks for coming, and I guess we'll see you guys in everybody in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.